Hello, everyone. You are listening to the Maitri podcast between friends, Conversations with Maitri. And this is your host, Nandini Ray. If you are joining us for the first time, welcome. Let me share a little bit about Maitri. Since 1991, Maitri has been committed to providing free, confidential, and culturally responsive services to victims and survivors of domestic violence, especially within the South Asian community. Through this podcast, our goal is to raise awareness about domestic violence, gender based violence, and related issues that impact our communities. Today, we have a very important conversation lined up. Joining us are Maitri representative Tejeswi Dodda and certified financial planner Ariadne Horstman, who will delve into the topic of financial abuse in partner relationships. Thank you for joining us today, and let's dive into this conversation that could be life changing.
Lakshmi first met her spouse at a work party. Their time together often involved talking about their love for data science and everything about numbers. They married, and slowly she could no longer understand if it was love or a mask of control. At first, it felt natural for him to take charge of their finances. He claimed it was for her own good, stating that managing money was stressful and that he wanted to shield her from the burden. She didn't realize then how that shield would turn into a cage. He provided her with a small allowance for gas and groceries, just enough to get by, but never enough for anything extra. She felt guilty for wanting more, as if she were ungrateful for his generosity. Slowly, she began to lose touch with her friends. When she mentioned wanting to meet them, he would become upset, insisting it was a waste of money. She didn't recognize how isolated she was becoming. He often asked her to sign for new credit cards, never offering an explanation for the need or the use for them. Over time, he made her feel inadequate, leading her to believe she had no skills or knowledge regarding finances. After many years of manipulation, when Lakshmi finally found the courage to leave, the debt he had taken in her name haunted her. Financial abuse is more complex and less understood in the context of domestic violence. According to the Center for Financial Security at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, financial abuse occurs in 99% of domestic violence cases. Today, we attempt to understand attitudes and behaviors that influence one's association with money and why so few women, including myself, have such low financial confidence and conditioning to manage money. And what can we do to change that conditioning and feelings about money? Welcome, everyone. My name is Tejeswi Dodda. I'm a member of Maitri's client advocacy team, managing self-sufficiency programs for housing and economic empowerment. Our guest today is Ariadne Horstman. Ariadne helps individuals and families realize personal goals and dreams through comprehensive financial planning and investment management as a partner with Tamarind Financial Planning. She's a registered life planner with the Kinder Institute. Before we begin, I'd like to remind all our listeners that our podcast today is not financial advice. All opinions expressed in this podcast belong to individuals and should not be inferred to their firm. This podcast is providing general, non personalized information only, and listeners should not construe anything as investment advice. Listeners should contact a licensed financial advisor if they have specific questions about investments or their own financial situation. Ariadne, thank you for joining us today to discuss this very important topic.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I would like to start by asking you, As a certified planner, what have you observed about one's participation in family finances? Is there any difference between how men and women view, associate, perceive, and manage money?
There are quite a few differences, although obviously there are, individual differences. But if we generalize, there are many studies that show that men tend to be much more confident with money. They take more risks and they feel that they have more financial literacy and that they're qualified to manage money, whether or not that is actually true. Women tend to feel less confident. They take fewer risks, and I'm talking about investing now, and they are more ready to ask for help. And all of these things can be a pro or a con. For example, women having less confidence in investing means that they will invest more conservatively, and sometimes it's too conservatively, and their money won't grow as much. But sometimes they do better because sometimes men can invest too riskily, and then that is also an issue. As far as managing money day to day, the vast majority of households operate in a way where males often tend to manage investments and things like that, and females tend to manage the day to day spending and household finances. So there's sort of these are generalizations, and it doesn't always work that way, but that's often how it happens. But in the work that I do, I have met many women in a relationship who manage everything, and that seems to work fine. Many women clients, they handle the finances and their spouses are comfortable with that. But it could just be the people who come to a female financial planner. I'm not sure. But I think there's generally one person in a relationship, be it a man or a woman, who wants to sort of take the lead on the finances. And that's okay. It's just important that the other person is also involved.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we have several survivors who seek services at Maitri, and we have observed that many of them have shared that they might not have access to accounts. If you were to share a couple of things about how do you recognize financial abuse?
Well, I guess not having access to accounts is would be an important one. So I would say for someone who is in a relationship and there are accounts and money involved, then it would be important that both people have information on the resources of the household, the accounts, the credit cards, the insurance, and that both people have access to those things, have logins for those things, and if one person does not have that information and is not able to get it, then that would be a red flag.
Mm-hmm. And if there is a spouse that might be unwilling to share this information, it's certainly something that the person might be very anxious about to take it further. So, are there strategies from the beginning uh, to keep your financial information ready and accessible for yourself?
Well, if the other person is not willing, that makes it difficult. So sometimes bringing in a third party can be helpful. For example, talking to a financial advisor, a financial planner who can work with the couple, or a CPA or an accountant. Another thing would be, requesting the logins and the information, asking for that. And if that is not forthcoming, then obviously that would be an issue. However, there are a lot of cases in which people have control over their own individual accounts. For example, if there is a joint account in a family and one of the people doesn't have access to it, if it is a joint account, that person could go to the bank and get their login, the bank or the institution or whatever organization it was. They could get their login and information.
Mm-hmm.
If the account was set up not jointly, that would be an issue.
Ariadne, what do you think is financial responsibility in a healthy relationship look like? You've mentioned that it is important for both people in the relationship to have access and information about their own financial resources. But why is it important for these partners to be equally knowledgeable about family finances?
Well, that's a really great question. We have to think about all of the things that might potentially happen in life. For example, what if something happens to one of the people? What if they are, have an illness or something else and they're not able to take care of it?
Mhm.
Both people should have that information so that they continue to run the household, especially if the one of the people needs support or medical care or whatever it may be, or there are children involved, and one of the people is suddenly not, incapacitated for some reason, then the person needs to be able to take care of the children or perhaps the elder parents or the responsibilities of the household. So definitely, if two people are in the household, they need to share that decision making and responsibility to be sure to take care of things. It's also important for both people to have understanding in order to have a good functioning financial household. For example, if there is a problem with debt or not enough money and people have to be careful and not spend too much, well, everybody has to know that, right, in the household so that they can take care. If one person is not actually getting the information, how can they make good decisions on how much to spend or how much is available or what are the resources available to them?
Mhm.
So it's really important that people both work together. And even if one person is taking charge of the finances, the other person really needs to be largely included in the decisions and the conversations.
So Ariane is staying with debt, and for example, a spouse wants to protect family's finances, for example, because of a money draining habit, or say excessive shopping or gambling, or purely because they have absolutely no control about what the other person is doing for family finances.
Mhm.
How would they go about that?
Well, if it's a problem in a marriage, if it's such a problem that the person wants to stop the marriage or get out of the marriage because it's the only way to stop the habit, then they could start the separation process. And then there are different rules that would come into play for that. But for example, for gambling, I had learned that if one spouse spends marital assets without the other spouse's consent, it's called dissipation of marital assets, which gambling is a common way of doing it. And
Mhm.
then when the if the marriage is ending and then there's a distribution of property, X amount is going to each person, the courts would take into account often that amount that had been spent on gambling. And so if one spouse had spent a lot of the finances on gambling, they might get much less in the distribution of property during a divorce situation.
Mhm.
And for example, if a credit card has a certain amount of money that's owed on it and that came from gambling, the court might only hold the other spouse, might hold them not liable for that. So the courts really have to look at this wasteful dissipation. They might consider the intent of the act, the concealment of wasted assets, the ability of one or both parties to access marital assets. So the ability to access, that's really important.
Mhm.
But ultimately, this is going to be decided by a judge. So you would need to speak to an attorney to
Mhm.
learn more about how another spouse's gambling debts might affect you. I don't know if shopping debts falls under this same category.
Okay. Okay. And to understand, how does healthy relationship look for in the perspective of finances in a family?
Mhm. So a healthy relationship would be two people working together. I mean, ultimately, it could be the whole family. I mean, I've heard of families where the parents sit down with the kids and explain to them, okay, we are managing this situation together, and this is how much money we have, and we're going to be careful. I mean, I've heard of people involving the kids. So as much of the family as possible to be involved in financial decisions would be great. And being able to determine their goals, like what are their goals? Is it retirement? Is it education for the children? Is it taking care of elders? And that the spouses could come to some agreement on the goals that they want, and that the spouses could both be involved in that, in working with the family, earning the money, investing the money, saving the money, spending the money, and both being involved in those decisions and being hopefully, both on the same page.
Mhm. There was one interesting question that we've come across with many women who might provide the majority of informal care to spouses, parents, or parents-in-law, friends, or neighbors. So they play many roles as caregivers. And while some might prioritize caregiving over participation in the workforce, some might do it simply because they might think the cost of childcare versus salaried income.
Mhm.
What do you think is really the core idea of this, and how does this really save money if you're at home and trying to do childcare instead of having a salaried income?
Well, this is a really important question because traditionally, women definitely do have more difficulties over the long term because they generally spend more time caregiving out of the workforce.
Mhm,
And that means that later on that they've saved less money for their own retirement because they weren't working the whole time. And also being out of the workforce more means that they haven't been able to keep up their skills to get better jobs, better promotions, better pay, and lacking, some experience and lacking the time in the workforce and the connections and the networking, they might end up doing more poorly in terms of their careers. But the thing is, women also live longer. So women actually need to save more for retirement because they might be living quite a bit longer than men. And as far as saving money, it's an important question to look at. If the children are young and childcare is very expensive, which we know it is,
mhm,
some people might be tempted to stay home instead of paying for the childcare. And over the long run, that might not be the best financial decision because, again, it's loss of salary, it's loss of time in the workforce, experience, gaining those credentials to get better jobs and increase earnings.
mhm,
But I understand sometimes one of the spouses might really want to stay home with the children, and then that's a discussion, how can this work?
mhm.
And there is a spousal IRA, so if one person's working and the other one is not, they can invest in this spousal IRA based on one person's income, and that puts some money away for retirement for the non-working spouse.
Okay. And while we're talking about financial instruments, tell us a little bit about the various financial instruments and assets, how they impact couples, and what can they do.
Okay, well, 401k accounts are very important. Those are retirement accounts that most companies offer their employees. And one of the interesting laws is that the beneficiary of that account must be the spouse if the person is married by law. And the only way to put another person's name as a beneficiary is to go get this document notarized with the agreement of the spouse who is not going to be the beneficiary anymore.
Mhm,
So that's something that usually legally it allows a lot of protection for a spouse. But keep in mind that other kinds of accounts, maybe a regular IRA or a regular investment account or a joint account, might not have those rules. So beneficiaries are important. It's important to put the beneficiary on the account, who you want that account to go to if something happens to you. So Social Security is very important because if you have been married 10 years or more to someone, then the spouse would be entitled to 50% of the Social Security amount of the spouse.
mhm,
If their own Social Security turned out to be more, then they wouldn't want to take the 50% of the spouse. But sometimes if someone didn't work and doesn't have much Social Security, it makes more sense to take the 50% of their spouse.
mhm,
But you do have to be married 10 years or longer. And then the spousal IRA, I recommended. It's a kind of retirement account for a non-working person that can be contributed to based upon the working person's income, and that's for spouses.
mhm,
Let's see. Inheritance is something to think about because if you inherit money in California, it is not considered joint money. Whereas California has community property, but if you inherit money, that's considered separate, but you have to keep it separate and you have to not commingle it. Keep it in a separate account. Do not use it to pay bills for the household. So if you do inherit money and you want to keep it separate, learn the rules and follow them.
mhm. Thank you. That was very insightful, Ariadne. I know that we've all come across different mechanisms of fraud for
Yeah.
finances that we have in our accounts. Can you tell us a little bit about what is the fraud hygiene uh, we can practice? What are some of the protections that we should be aware of?
Well, sure. Fraud is a very big thing in our lives today, and we all need to be super careful of it. So I would say in all of your logging into all of your financial things, always use the two-step authentication or two-factor authentication. Always log in, when you're on a safe internet, like hopefully at home or, not in a public place. And then it's important to track your information. So if you would want to freeze your credit so that people can't access your credit and open credit cards under your name.
Mhm.
And so freezing your credit is important for each member of the family. Everybody would have to do their own. And there are multiple credit agencies that you need to freeze the credit on.
Mhm.
And I just saw there's a way to freeze your social security number also. So people can't use your social security number for opening other accounts and things like that. I think at this point, we need to assume that most of our personal information is out there on the internet somewhere and people can get it. So we have to start taking really strong action to prevent people from using it.
Mhm. I had no idea that there was a way to freeze your social and your credit card. So that's something.
Yeah, the Social Security is a little more complicated. I was just reading about it the other day, but freezing your credit has been around for a while, and it's not that hard, but you do have to figure it out.
Mhm. So, assuming that someone has not participated in their family's finances, has very little knowledge, um, and probably a little averse because they think they might not be good or they might not have enough skill or knowledge, or because they're female and traditionally they didn't see females taking control of money, where would be a good place to start?
Well, one thing would be talking to your spouse and starting to have conversations about money if they're open to that. Talking to friends who are more knowledgeable about money, financial literacy could be good, or finding a mentor, finding people that you that are good with money that can help you. I think getting interested and involved, like reviewing your accounts, having your own logins to different accounts, and starting to ask questions about what these things mean, where the information is. Even if you log into an account and you don't understand anything, just like look at it and try to understand it a little bit and start to learn.
Mhm.
Um, then having your name on credit card bills, utility bills, lease, mortgage is helpful so that your name, you're getting credit, gaining your own credit history on different things. You could take a basic financial literacy class at a community college or a local organization. You could Google things online and look for different organizations that have information, and I will follow up with some books and some different resources. But I think if you have a family with money, it's really important to have multiple people, for example, husband and wife or spouses, who are communicating about that. Because if you have one person in charge of all the money,
Mhm.
that could lead to fraud itself and problems. It's better if there's open communication.
Okay. Thank you, Ariadne. This was an insightful conversation. Some of the aspects you brought up today have given us all food for thought, and I hope our listeners are going to use this moment as a moment of reflection for themselves and their families and what next steps they could do on their journey to financial independence. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you so much, Tejeswi and Ariadne, for this insightful discussion. Listeners, thank you for tuning in to the Maitri podcast Between Friends. Please don't forget that you can find all our episodes on Maitri Bay Area's YouTube channel, Spotify, and other podcast platforms. Please like, share, and follow Maitri's podcast Between Friends Conversations with Maitri. And follow our social media pages on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And please spread the word. Thanks again for listening. Bye for now, and we will catch you in the next episode. Maitri is a free, confidential, non-profit organization based in the San Francisco Bay Area that helps families and individuals facing domestic violence. Don't suffer in silence. Call Maitri Helpline 1-8888-8 Maitri. Visit our website maitri.org.
This show is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as legal advice. Always consult an attorney for legal advice. Views expressed by guests of the radio show are individual opinions and not endorsed by Maitri.